My son told me not to come home for Christmas. He said his dad's new wife was going to be there and they needed her to feel like family. I simply agreed and drove away. But by 10 the next morning, my son was calling me in tears, asking why the Pentagon had just shown up at their front door. My name is Clara. I am 34 years old, and I serve as a major in the United States Cyber Command. For years, my ex-husband Richard treated me like a lowly government wage slave. He thought he held all the power. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a toxic ex a lesson they will never forget. Rain turned to freezing sleet against the windshield of my car. I sat parked at the end of the long, sweeping driveway of a sprawling suburban mansion in Maryland. The engine idled quietly while I stared at the massive Christmas wreath hanging on the custom mahogany double doors. In the passenger seat sat a perfectly wrapped box. It was a high-end racing drone I had saved up to buy for my 13-year-old son, Leo. I had the phone on speaker resting on the center console. Leo was on the line, but he was not speaking right away. I could hear the muffled sound of a hand covering the receiver and a sharp, familiar voice whispering urgent instructions in the background. It was Richard. My ex-husband was 36 years old and carried himself with the unearned arrogance of a man who believed money made him invincible. "Leo, honey, I am outside," I said, keeping my tone warm and steady. "I can just drop the gift at the door if you want to come out and say a quick hello." There was another rustle of fabric on the phone. Then Leo finally spoke. His voice trembled slightly, and it broke my heart to hear the hesitation in my brave boy. "Mom," Leo stammered, "Dad's wife will be there. We want her to feel like she is part of the family. You shouldn't come." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The words felt like a physical blow to the chest. I knew Richard had scripted that exact sentence. He was using our son as a weapon to elevate his new 28-year-old bride, Brittany. I did not cry. Crying was exactly what Richard wanted. He wanted a hysterical scene on his front lawn so he could point out the window and tell his rich neighbors that his ex-wife was unstable. He loved playing the role of the generous provider who had outgrown his starter wife. I took a deep breath to calm the sudden spike of adrenaline in my blood. "Okay, Leo," I said softly. "I love you. Merry Christmas." I ended the call before Richard could grab the phone to gloat. Almost immediately, the screen lit up with a new notification. It was a text message from Brittany. I opened it and read the words twice to make sure I was comprehending her absolute audacity. "Thanks for understanding, Clara. Richard says your government desk job barely pays the bills, so Leo is better off getting used to our lifestyle. Enjoy your boring barracks." I stared at the text. A boring barracks. A lowly desk job. Richard had spent the last 3 years of our divorce proceedings convincing everyone in his wealthy social circle that I was just a low-level administrative clerk struggling to survive on government wages. He loved flaunting the multi-million-dollar mansion he had somehow purchased just months after claiming poverty during our asset division. I looked at the $800 drone wrapped in shiny silver paper. I picked up my phone and typed a single reply to Brittany. A simple thumbs-up emoji. No anger, no pleading, just a cold, calm acknowledgement. I stepped out into the freezing rain. I walked over to the communal trash bin at the edge of the estate and tossed the expensive gift right into the garbage. I got back into my cold car, shifted into drive, and pulled away from the wealthy neighborhood without looking in the rearview mirror. I drove straight back to the military base. The roads were empty on Christmas Eve, giving me plenty of time to formulate my next move. Richard thought he had completely outsmarted me. He thought his financial abuse and emotional manipulation had beaten me into submission. He truly believed I was just a clueless paper pusher who could not afford to fight him in court. He had no idea what I actually did at that desk. I swiped my military identification badge at the main security gate and drove toward the Secure Operations Center. The facility was quiet, with only essential personnel on duty for the holiday. I walked past the festive decorations in the lobby and entered the sterile, brightly lit server room. I sat down at my terminal and let my fingers hover over the keyboard. Richard had forced my hand. He wanted to play games with our son and use his wealth to assert dominance. It was time to show him exactly where that wealth came from. I logged into the highly secure system, bypassing my standard daily clearance. I navigated past the routine defensive grids and accessed a restricted interface. My screen glowed with a red warning banner. I did not hesitate. I initiated a direct command sequence and clicked on the protocol labeled Top Secret Financial Audit Protocol. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner panel mounted next to my keyboard. A green light flashed, acknowledging my verified identity. The encrypted database immediately opened, displaying thousands of classified financial records. I typed my ex-husband's name into the search bar and pressed enter to seal his fate. The digital clock on the sterile concrete wall of the Military Operations Center flipped to exactly 10 in the morning. Clara sat perfectly still in her ergonomic chair. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a low and steady rhythm against the absolute silence of the base. Her issued coffee thermos rested on the brushed steel desk beside a secondary burner phone she kept specifically for emergencies involving her son. She had spent the entire night watching lines of encrypted code process through the secure mainframe, waiting for the automated dominoes she had tipped over to finally crash. At precisely 1 minute past 10, the burner phone vibrated violently across the metal surface. She did not rush. She picked it up and accepted the call. Leo was on the other end. His breathing was jagged and frantic. He was practically shouting over a cacophony of deep voices, heavy boots, and barking dogs in the background. "Mom, why did the Pentagon just call Dad?" He sounded absolutely terrified, his voice cracking under the intense pressure of the morning. "There are men in windbreakers surrounding the house. They have badges, and they are blocking the driveway with black SUVs. Clara kept her voice remarkably level, projecting the calm, authoritative command she used when neutralizing hostile server threats. "Go to your room, Leo. Lock the door and put on your noise-canceling headphones. Do not speak to anyone until I get there. You are perfectly safe." Before the boy could respond, a loud scuffle echoed through the receiver. Clara heard the distinct sound of a phone being snatched away by physical force. Heavy, panicked breathing filled the speaker. It was Richard. The polished, arrogant tone from yesterday had completely vanished. It was replaced by raw, unhinged hysteria. "What the hell did you do, Clara?" His voice cracked as he screamed into the microphone. "I just tried to buy Brittany a diamond necklace online for Christmas and my accounts are locked." All of them. My private wealth management portal is showing a negative balance of $2.4 million. Why are there federal agents scanning the vehicle identification numbers on my luxury cars? Outside Richard's window, Clara could hear the distinct authoritative commands of federal marshals establishing a secure perimeter around the property. Richard was unraveling in real time, losing the carefully constructed facade he used to dominate everyone around him. "Tell them to leave right now," he demanded, slamming his hand against something hard, making the audio spike. "You call your pathetic little government boss this second and tell them there has been a massive mistake. My wife is crying in the driveway in her silk pajamas, and the neighbors are filming us." Clara lifted her thermos and took a slow, deliberate sip of her bitter black coffee. Her eyes traced the cascading lines of encrypted data flowing across her monitor, showing the real-time asset seizures taking place. "I did not do anything, Richard." Her voice was ice-cold, slicing right through his frantic shouting. "I simply followed standard military procedure. Last night, I initiated a routine upgrade to my security clearance, elevating it to top secret. When a ranking officer requests that level of clearance, the Department of Defense automatically runs a comprehensive biometric financial sweep of all assets tied to their social security number. It is a mandatory protocol to ensure military personnel are not compromised by unexplained debt or foreign financial leverage." Clara paused, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second, so the harsh reality could sink deep into his skull. The automated sweep flagged a massive discrepancy. It found an active military VA home loan attached to my identity, a $2 million federal loan I never signed for or authorized. You used my active duty credentials and forged my signature to secure a zero down payment loan so you could buy your new wife a luxury estate while telling the family court you were broke. You stole from the United States government, Richard. You stole from a commissioned officer. For a brief moment, the line went dead quiet, save for the heavy thud of fists pounding on Richard's front door. The agents were demanding entry, but instead of realizing he was completely trapped, Richard leaned into his lifelong habit of manipulation and gaslighting. He let out a breathless, arrogant sneer. He genuinely believed his inherited privilege and smooth talking made him bulletproof against the law. "You are bluffing," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom and desperation. "You have absolutely no proof of any forgery. My parents were there on closing day. They signed as legal witnesses to the paperwork. We will just tell the federal judge you happily agreed to the mortgage and then maliciously changed your mind because you are a jealous, bitter, lonely ex-wife trying to ruin our Christmas. Good luck fighting my family's expensive corporate lawyers with your miserable military salary. You are going to look like a crazy woman, and I will take full custody of Leo." Clara did not raise her voice. She did not argue or attempt to justify herself. She simply looked at the blinking red terminal screen indicating the tactical breach was currently underway. "I do not need a lawyer, Richard. The federal government has plenty of them, and they do not take kindly to wire fraud." A massive crash erupted through the phone speaker. The unmistakable sound of a reinforced mahogany door being battered off its hinges echoed loudly, followed by several men shouting commands to get on the ground immediately. Clara calmly pressed the red button to end the call and set the phone face down on the desk. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the dark screen. Her heart beat with a steady, powerful rhythm. The years of financial abuse and endless emotional manipulation were finally over. Richard had built his entire kingdom on a foundation of lies and stolen federal funds. Now that whole kingdom was burning completely to the ground today. The heavy metal door of the server room sealed shut, leaving Clara in the humming silence of the Cyber Command Center. Before she could process the sound of the federal raid on Richard, her secondary burner phone vibrated aggressively across the brushed steel desk. The caller ID flashed a familiar name. It was Nicole. Richard's younger sister had always treated anyone marrying into their family as hired help. Clara accepted the call, bracing for the inevitable explosion. Nicole did not even wait for a greeting. Her voice was a shrill shriek, forcing Clara to pull the device away. "You absolute jealous psycho," Nicole screamed, her words slurring with early afternoon champagne. "Richard just texted the group chat that you froze his accounts. You are trying to ruin our Christmas because you cannot handle that my brother upgraded to a prettier wife who actually knows how to treat a man." She took a slow breath, refusing to let Nicole provoke an emotional response. "I do not control the federal government," Nicole Clara stated with absolute precision. "If Richard has a problem with his bank accounts, he needs to speak with the Department of Defense, not me." "Do not play your technical games with me," Nicole snapped. "You are just bitter. He bought a $2 million estate while you are stuck in miserable government housing. You need to undo this right now. Clara or I swear our parents will hire the best lawyers to take Leo away from you permanently. You will be paying my brother alimony for the rest of your pathetic life." Clara felt a spark of righteous anger but channeled it entirely into her focus. "Nicole," Clara said, her tone dropping to a dangerous calm, "you might want to stop talking and start paying attention to what your brother actually did with those closing documents." Before Nicole could launch into another tirade, a scuffle echoed through the phone. Clara heard a deep, commanding voice demanding the device. The background noise shifted instantly. The phone was snatched away. "Clara, do not hang up." The voice belonged to Isaiah, Nicole's husband. Isaiah was a sharp, no-nonsense forensic accountant who managed portfolios for high-net-worth clients. Unlike the rest of Richard's family, Isaiah treated Clara with respect. He was a strict CPA with zero tolerance for his brother-in-law's reckless entitlement. Isaiah's tone was completely different from his wife's. It was cold. It was calculating. It was laced with raw, unadulterated panic. "Isaiah," Clara replied, shifting her posture in the chair, "I suggest you take your kids and leave that house immediately." "Clara, listen to me very carefully," Isaiah said, locking himself in a quiet room. Richard would not stop bragging at Thanksgiving dinner about the incredible interest rate he secured on that new mansion. He kept waving the closing disclosure forms around after a few drinks, showing off how he bypassed the standard jumbo loan requirements. Clara closed her eyes, picturing the smirk Richard had worn, while waving the evidence of his own federal crimes in front of a licensed forensic accountant. "And what did you see on those forms, Isaiah?" "I saw anomalies," Isaiah said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "I saw structured debt-to-income ratios that made absolutely no sense for a self-employed consultant like him. I saw a primary applicant listing with a military service number. But I told myself I was just being paranoid. I told myself my brother-in-law could not possibly be stupid enough to cross that line." "He crossed it," Clara confirmed, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "Clara, please." Isaiah pleaded, the panic now fully overtaking his usual professional detachment. "Please tell me he did not use your active duty credentials to bypass the federal escrow limits. Please tell me he did not forge a Department of Veterans Affairs loan application." Clara watched a red flag populate on her audit screen, indicating a direct hit on a fraudulent notary stamp. "He did exactly that, Isaiah. He took the active duty deployment papers from my file cabinet when he kicked me out. He forged my signature. He used my top secret clearance status to push the loan through an automated federal approval system without secondary manual verification. The Department of Defense just caught the discrepancy. This is not a civil dispute. It is a federal seizure." A heavy silence fell over the phone line. Clara could hear the frantic calculations running through Isaiah's mind. As a CPA married to Richard's sister, his own professional license and freedom were suddenly in extreme jeopardy just by being associated with the family. If Richard had used family members to witness or notarize those forged documents, the federal government would cast a very wide net. "He asked my wife to sign a character affidavit for his custody petition last week," Isaiah whispered, the realization hitting him like a freight train. "He asked my wife to attest to his financial stability and moral character. If she signed anything attached to his financial disclosures, she is implicated," Clara warned, offering the only piece of advice she could give the one decent man in that family. "The Defense Criminal Investigative Service is already inside his house. They are pulling hard drives and seizing paper files." Clara heard Isaiah let out a sharp, shaking exhale. The locked door being thrown open echoed through the speaker. Clara heard Isaiah turn completely away from the phone. "Isaiah, who are you talking to? Give me my phone back right now," voice whined in the background. Isaiah's response was a booming roar that shattered the holiday atmosphere in their home. "Nicole, pack your bags right this second. Your brother committed federal wire fraud against the United States military. We are leaving this house before we are named as co-conspirators." Clara listened to the sound of a glass shattering against the floor and Nicole screaming in confusion as the line went completely dead. She smiled thinly now. Federal agents dismantled the heavy mahogany front doors downstairs. The pounding echoed up the grand sweeping staircase into the private study of Richard. Inside the room, the air was thick with panicked sweat and expensive cologne. Richard paced like a cornered animal behind his massive marble desk, his silk tie yanked loose. He frantically shoved loose papers into a shredder that was already jamming from overuse. Isaiah stood motionless by the door, his arms crossed over his chest. Nicole stood trembling between them, her eyes darting from her furious brother to her stone-faced husband. Richard slammed his hands down on the desk and glared at Isaiah. He pointed a shaking finger at the accountant. "You need to fix this right now, Isaiah. You are a CPA. You know how to move numbers around and make this look like a simple clerical error. I brought you into this family. I gave you a seat at our table when my parents thought Nicole was making a massive mistake marrying someone from your specific background. You owe me your loyalty." Isaiah did not flinch. His expression remained absolutely lethal. He stepped forward, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "Do not dare bring my background into this, Richard. My background is exactly why I do not commit federal wire fraud. I built my firm on integrity while you built this entire fake empire by stealing the identity of the mother of your child. I owe you nothing." Richard sneered, stepping out from behind the desk. His face was flushed with frantic rage. He approached Isaiah with his chest puffed out, trying to use his height to intimidate him. "You are just paranoid, Isaiah. You are letting your natural insecurities make you overreact. This is a family matter. Clara is just a vindictive ex-wife throwing a tantrum because she is jealous of Brittany. She probably hacked the Pentagon system illegally, just to harass me. I am the victim here. We just need to present a united front to those suits downstairs and tell them Clara consented to the loan." Richard spun around and grabbed a stack of legal documents from his printer tray. He shoved a gold fountain pen into the shaking hand of Nicole and slammed the papers down in front of her. "Sign this right now, Nicole. It is a sworn affidavit stating you were present in the room when Clara gave me verbal permission to use her military credentials for the mortgage. Just put your name on the dotted line and those agents will leave. We are family, Nicole. Blood protects blood." Nicole raised the pen. Tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining her expensive holiday makeup. She looked at the desperate, demanding eyes of her brother, and then down at the false testimony. She lowered the pen toward the signature line. Isaiah moved faster than Richard could blink. He lunged across the room and physically intercepted his wife. He grabbed the wrist of Nicole with a firm, protective grip and yanked her hand away from the desk. He shoved his body squarely between Richard and Nicole, acting as a human shield. "Are you out of your mind?" Isaiah roared, his composure finally breaking into pure, unadulterated fury. He snatched the affidavit from the desk and tore it in half, throwing the pieces directly into the face of Richard. "You are trying to make your own sister commit perjury on a federal investigation document. You are trying to drag my wife into a 20-year prison sentence just to save your own pathetic skin. If you touch that pen again, Nicole, I am filing for divorce before we even leave this driveway. We are walking out of this house right now, and we are telling those agents exactly what we know." Richard backed away from Isaiah, his mouth hanging open in shock. He had spent his entire life bullying his sister into submission, and he had severely underestimated the man she married. The sound of the front doors finally giving way shattered the remaining silence in the house. Heavy boots swarmed the marble foyer below. Federal marshals began shouting commands, securing the perimeter, and demanding the owner of the property present himself immediately. Richard realized in that exact moment that his internal family faction had completely collapsed. He had no allies left in the room. His sister was sobbing into the shoulder of her husband, and Isaiah was already reaching for the brass doorknob to let the federal agents inside the study. The luxurious world Richard had stolen was evaporating by the second. His panic mutated into a dark, vindictive rage. If he was going down, he was going to inflict maximum collateral damage on the woman who exposed him. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumbs flying across the screen. He opened his encrypted legal application and downloaded a file he had finalized just 24 hours prior. It was his ultimate contingency plan, a plan designed to break Clara completely if she ever dared to challenge his authority. He attached the file to a text message and hit send. Miles away on the secure military base, Clara sat quietly at her terminal, watching the financial asset seizures roll across her screen in real time. Her burner phone chimed with a sharp notification. She looked down at the bright screen. It was a message from Richard containing a high-resolution image of a court-stamped document. Clara slowly picked up the device and carefully zoomed in on the text. Her eyes rapidly scanned the stark black legal lettering on the display. It was an official emergency ex parte order stamped and approved by a local civilian family court judge. She read the hateful message Richard quickly typed directly beneath the attached image. "I just filed an emergency ex parte order. I am claiming your military service makes you an absentee, mentally unstable mother. I am taking full custody of Leo. You will never see him again." The text message from Richard glowed with toxic intent. Clara stared at the threat of losing Leo completely. Before she could even process the audacity of a man currently surrounded by federal agents, claiming she was the unstable parent, a new notification chimed on her encrypted workstation. It was a flagged priority alert from a junior cybersecurity analyst 2 desks down. The analyst had sent a direct link with a single line of text, warning her that a targeted public relations attack was currently accelerating across local civilian networks. Clara clicked the link. The screen immediately populated with a high-definition video feed, It was Brittany. Richard's 28-year-old bride was sitting in the immaculate leather interior of a luxury vehicle. Her perfectly contoured face was streaked with dramatic, calculated tears. She held her smartphone at a slightly elevated angle to capture her distress perfectly. "I never do this, you guys," Brittany whimpered into the camera, wiping a carefully manicured finger beneath her eye to avoid smudging her mascara. "I always try to keep our family life private, but we are under attack right now. My husband's ex-wife is a deranged military stalker. She is using her government clearance to illegally freeze all our bank accounts on Christmas Eve. We literally have federal agents tearing our beautiful home apart because she filed a fake report out of pure bitter jealousy." Brittany let out a trembling sob that sounded expertly rehearsed. She pulled a designer tissue from her center console and dabbed her nose. "The worst part is that she is doing this to her own son. She is actively trying to leave a 13-year-old boy homeless on Christmas just to punish us for being happy. Please share this video. The military needs to know what kind of unhinged psycho they have working for them." Clara checked the metrics displayed beneath the video player. The engagement algorithms were already working overtime. Within 45 minutes, the post had amassed tens of thousands of views across the greater Maryland and Washington metropolitan area. The comments section was a raging wildfire of misdirected outrage. Strangers were demanding Clara be court-martialed, discharged, and thrown in a federal penitentiary. Brittany was successfully mobilizing an army of sympathetic followers who blindly believed the tears of a wealthy suburban influencer. A heavy shadow fell across the brushed steel desk. Clara looked up to see Colonel Mitchell standing directly behind her terminal. Her commanding officer possessed a stern, weathered face and a reputation for absolute operational discipline. He had quietly observed the video playing on her secondary monitor. He placed his hands behind his back and looked down at her with a measured, professional gaze. Major Wilson, the colonel, began, his voice dropping to a low, rumbling register. "We have civilian authorities executing a high-level asset seizure at your former residence. Now we have a viral social media campaign attempting to publicly compromise the integrity of a commissioned officer in this command. I need to know if your personal situation is compromising your operational effectiveness. Do you need to stand down and step away from this terminal?" Clara did not hesitate. She maintained direct eye contact with her superior officer. Her expression remained completely devoid of panic or emotional distress. "I do not need to stand down, sir. I am currently running a forensic countermeasure protocol. The individual in that video just provided me with a direct entry point into their unsecured wireless network by broadcasting from a vehicle registered to a targeted suspect." Colonel Mitchell held her gaze for a long, silent moment. He recognized the cold, analytical focus in her eyes. He gave a single crisp nod of approval. "Proceed, Major. Neutralize the threat." Clara turned her attention back to her primary monitor. She bypassed her standard defense interface and opened a highly restricted digital tracking program. She did not care about the tearful lies Brittany was spinning for her followers. She cared about data. She cared about the digital footprint Brittany left behind every time she swiped a credit card or logged into a luxury retail portal. Clara isolated the IP address attached to the social media upload. The signal pinged directly to a proprietary cellular network installed inside a late-model European sports car. Clara initiated a deep dive into the financial ledgers that the biometric sweep had unlocked earlier that morning. She cross-referenced the vehicle identification number with the purchasing data of Brittany's known influencer accounts. The screen flooded with transactional history. Brittany had not just been buying designer handbags and expensive skincare products with Richard's money. Clara watched the digital thread weave through a labyrinth of shell accounts and rapid wire transfers designed to obscure the origin of the funds. The money trail bypassed Richard's standard corporate accounts entirely. Clara typed a rapid sequence of commands, stripping away the final layer of financial encryption. The true funding source flashed onto the screen in bright green text. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. The money was not coming from Richard's business. It was bleeding out of an irrevocable educational trust. It was Leo's college fund. Clara had personally established that account when Leo was born, funneling a portion of her modest military salary into the fund every single month for 13 years. Richard had managed to alter the trustee authorization using the same forged credentials he utilized for the mortgage. The financial data showed a catastrophic final withdrawal processed exactly 3 days ago. Brittany had systematically drained $90,000 of a young child's future educational savings without remorse. She had illegally liquidated every single cent Clara had carefully preserved over a decade to purchase a brand new silver Porsche Cayenne. The very same expensive luxury vehicle Brittany was currently sitting safely inside while crying fake tears to the entire internet about Clara maliciously trying to ruin their perfect loving family right before the holiday season officially began. Clara stared at the glowing green text on her monitor, indicating the complete liquidation of her son's educational trust. $90,000 vanished into the sleek silver chassis of a luxury vehicle. Brittany had not just stolen money. She had stolen the future Clara had meticulously built for Leo. Clara did not scream. She did not cry. She executed a rapid keystroke sequence to capture every encrypted packet of transactional data. She downloaded the wire transfer receipts, the altered trustee signatures, and the dealership purchase agreement. She secured the digital evidence into an impenetrable offline drive. She had 72 hours before Richard's emergency custody hearing. 72 hours to ensure the man who tried to take her son would walk out of the courthouse with absolutely nothing. The morning of the emergency custody hearing arrived with a biting winter chill. The marble columns of the county courthouse loomed large against the gray sky. Inside the bustling corridor outside Family Courtroom B, Richard made his entrance. He wore a custom-tailored Italian suit that screamed corporate wealth. His hair was perfectly styled to project the image of a concerned, capable father. Brittany clung tightly to his arm, wearing a conservative designer dress meant to play the role of the innocent stepmother. She had expertly applied her makeup to look distressed and exhausted for the judge. They walked with the unearned swagger of people who believe their bank accounts place them above the law. Then Clara arrived. She did not wear a drab civilian pantsuit. She walked down the polished marble corridor in her impeccably pressed Class A military uniform. The dark fabric was immaculate. The brass buttons gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The colorful rows of commendation ribbons rested proudly over her heart, projecting an aura of absolute discipline and unyielding authority. The casual chatter in the hallway immediately died down as people turned to look at her. Richard noticed the shift in the room. His smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second when he saw the imposing figure of his ex-wife. He had spent years convincing his social circle that Clara was a low-level desk clerk. The heavy brass on her uniform told an entirely different story. Before Clara could reach the heavy oak doors of the courtroom, a man in a sharp charcoal pinstripe suit stepped directly into her path. It was Vance Sterling. He was Richard's high-priced, aggressively ruthless family law attorney. Vance had a reputation for burying opposing counsel in endless paperwork and bankrupting ex-spouses. He blocked Clara from moving forward and flashed a predatory shark-like smile. Major Wilson Vance said, drawing out her title with a distinct layer of mockery. "I must admit I am surprised you actually showed up today. I reviewed your military pay grade this morning. It is truly a modest living. I charge more for a retainer than you make in a year. You are walking into a slaughterhouse today. My client is a highly successful businessman who can provide a stable, luxurious life for his son. You are an absentee mother whose demanding government job makes you completely unfit for primary custody." Clara stood perfectly still, her posture rigidly straight. She did not break eye contact. Vance leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a threatening whisper. "Richard is prepared to drag this custody battle out for years. We will file motion after motion until your meager savings are completely drained. We will depose your commanding officers. We will subpoena your mental health records. By the time I am done with you, you will be drowning in legal fees and begging for weekend visitation rights. If you sign this voluntary surrender of custody right now, I will convince Richard to let you keep your cheap little car." Clara looked at the expensive silk tie Vance was wearing. She looked at the smug face of Richard standing a few feet away with his arms crossed in triumph. Brittany was busy checking her reflection in her phone screen, completely oblivious to the gravity of a federal courthouse. Clara did not blink. She simply adjusted the cuff of her uniform jacket. "You are operating under the assumption that we are here to argue about family law." "Mr. Sterling," Clara said, her voice echoing with military precision, "you are about to find out that you brought a divorce petition to a federal battlefield." The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open. The bailiff called the emergency ex parte hearing to order. Richard confidently guided Brittany to the petitioner table while Vance strutted behind them, organizing his thick leather binders of fabricated evidence. Clara walked calmly to the respondent table entirely alone. She carried no briefcase. She had no expensive attorney whispering in her ear. She simply placed a single encrypted tablet face down on the polished wood surface. The civilian judge adjusted his glasses and looked down from the bench. He scanned the aggressive filing Richard had submitted, claiming immediate danger to the minor child. The judge cleared his throat, preparing to ask Clara why she had not secured legal representation for such a severe accusation. Before the judge could speak, a sharp, commanding sound echoed from the corridor. Heavy military boots struck the marble floor in perfect synchronized rhythm. The rhythmic thud bypassed the gallery seating and marched straight down the center aisle of the courtroom. A high-ranking judge advocate general officer stepped through the swinging gate and halted directly beside Clara. He wore a crisp dress uniform decorated with stars and commendations that commanded immediate silence. He was flanked by two armed military police officers. The entire room froze. Richard dropped his pen. Vance stood up with his mouth hanging open in shock. The JAG officer did not look at Richard. He reached inside his tailored jacket and produced a manila envelope sealed tightly with dark red wax. "Your Honor, the Department of Defense has a classified addendum to this custody dispute." The civilian judge stared at the thick manila envelope sealed with dark red wax resting on his mahogany bench. The imposing judge advocate general officer stood at rigid attention beside Clara, awaiting permission to proceed. The judge carefully broke the wax seal and pulled out a stack of heavily redacted documents. His eyes scanned the first page. The color slowly drained from his face. He set the papers down and looked directly at Richard. He instructed Vance to proceed with his emergency petition, but his tone had turned dangerously cold. Vance immediately called Brittany to the stand. She looked at the judge with wide, innocent, tearful eyes. Vance asked her to explain why they filed for emergency custody. Brittany took a shaky breath. "It is Clara, Your Honor. She is completely unhinged. She is using her military connections to stalk us and harass us. Just yesterday, she froze all of our bank accounts right before Christmas. She sent federal agents to raid our home and traumatize us. We are terrified of her. But what breaks my heart the most is what she is doing to Leo. Leo is a sweet, innocent 13-year-old boy." Brittany sobbed, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. "He needs stability. He needs a warm, loving home with a father who can provide for him. Clara is trying to leave him homeless on the holidays just to punish Richard for finding happiness. She is a deranged military stalker, and she is not mentally fit to be a mother. We just want to give Leo the safe, luxurious life he deserves." The judge did not offer her a sympathetic smile. He looked down at the documents provided by the Department of Defense. He turned his attention to the JAG officer standing beside Clara. The judge asked how the military intended to respond to these severe allegations of harassment and abuse of federal power. The JAG officer stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with the crushing weight of absolute authority. "Your Honor, the United States military does not involve itself in civilian custody disputes. However, we do involve ourselves when a commissioned officer is the victim of targeted federal wire fraud. We are here today because the petitioner Richard has attempted to use this court to obscure a massive financial crime. Furthermore, the witness currently crying on the stand is a direct accessory to that crime. Vance leaped to his feet. He slammed his hands on the table and shouted an objection. He claimed the military was trying to intimidate his client with baseless accusations. The judge instructed the JAG officer to present the findings of the federal audit. The officer produced a secure encrypted laptop and connected it to the digital projector in the center of the courtroom. A massive spreadsheet illuminated the large screen mounted on the wall. It was a direct feed of the financial sweep Clara had executed from the Cyber Command Center. The officer pointed to a specific highlighted column. Your Honor, the witness claims she wants to provide a safe and luxurious life for the minor child, the officer stated, projecting his voice clearly across the silent room. Let us examine how exactly she funds that luxury. The document on the screen is an irrevocable educational trust fund. Major Wilson established this account 13 years ago to pay for the future college tuition of her son, Leo. She deposited a portion of her active duty military salary into this account every single month for over a decade. The screen shifted to a new document showing a series of complex banking maneuvers. 3 days ago, the officer continued, the entire balance of this educational trust was completely liquidated. $90,000 was drained from the account and funneled through a series of anonymous shell companies. The funds were then wired directly to a luxury automotive dealership in downtown Baltimore. Brittany stopped crying. Her tissue fell from her hand and landed on the wooden floor. She looked at Richard with absolute terror in her eyes. Richard was staring at the projection screen with his jaw clenched so tightly a vein throbbed in his neck. The JAG officer advanced the slide. The screen displayed a digital receipt complete with exact timestamps and purchasing authorizations. The purchase order showed a brand new silver Porsche Cayenne. The registration attached to the vehicle belongs exclusively to the witness Brittany. She did not just spend her husband's money, Your Honor. She systematically drained the college fund of a 13-year-old boy to buy herself a $90,000 sports car. She literally stole the future of the child she claims to care so deeply about. The courtroom erupted into a suffocating silence. Vance stared completely paralyzed. He had built his entire legal strategy on portraying Clara as an unstable, jealous ex-wife. He had absolutely no defense against a fully documented federal audit proving his clients were thieves. Richard panicked. He pointed a shaking finger at his wife. I had no idea, Richard shouted. I swear to you, Your Honor, I knew nothing about the college fund being liquidated. Brittany handles all of her own finances. She must have hacked into the account behind my back. She is a greedy, manipulative liar. She stole that money on her own. Brittany gasped. You lying coward, she shrieked. The judge slammed his gavel down. He pulled out a card. Is that right, Richard? The judge asked, his voice dripping with lethal contempt. You claim you had absolutely no knowledge of this transaction. You claim your wife orchestrated this massive financial theft completely behind your back. The judge held the signature card high in the air for the entire courtroom to see. The bold black ink was magnified perfectly on the digital projector screen behind the JAG officer. Then why, Richard, the judge asked, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. Is your signature on the wire transfer authorizing the theft of your own son's future? Richard stared at the digital projection of his own signature. The ink was undeniable. The entire courtroom watched as the wealthy businessman was reduced to a cornered rat. The judge leaned forward, demanding an immediate explanation. Richard swallowed hard, adjusting his silk tie with trembling fingers. His eyes darted across the room, searching for any viable escape route. He pointed a shaking finger toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. He ignored the financial evidence completely and played his final desperate card. You need to speak to my son, Richard, shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Bring Leo into your chambers right now. This financial issue is a separate misunderstanding, but the emergency petition remains valid. Clara is dangerous. She is emotionally abusive. Leo will tell you himself. He is terrified of her. I demand you hear from the child. The judge slammed his gavel down, silencing Richard instantly. He glared at the desperate man before him. He ordered the bailiff to retrieve the boy from the waiting area and escort him directly into private chambers. He instructed Clara, the military officer Richard, and Vance to follow. Brittany was ordered to remain in the gallery. The heavy, solid mahogany door of the private chambers clicked shut. The room was lined with thick legal volumes and smelled of aged paper. The judge sat behind his desk, folding his hands. Leo was escorted into the room. He was 13 but looked incredibly small, sitting in the oversized leather chair. He wore a button-down shirt that hung loose on his thin frame. His eyes were wide and filled with raw terror. Richard immediately positioned himself directly in the line of sight of his son. He stood perfectly rigid. He locked his eyes onto Leo, delivering a cold, piercing glare. It was a silent, unmistakable threat. Richard had spent the entire morning drilling the fabricated narrative into the head of the boy. He had promised Leo severe consequences if he deviated from the script. He expected the child to shrink under his gaze and repeat the lies perfectly. The judge softened his tone. He looked at the trembling boy. "Leo, you are safe here," the judge said gently. "Your father filed an emergency petition claiming that you are in danger when you are with your mother. He claims she is harassing your family and causing you severe emotional distress. I need you to tell me the truth about what happens in your home." Richard took a half step forward. His shadow fell across the boy. "Go ahead, Leo," Richard commanded, his voice dripping with venomous authority. "Tell the judge exactly what we talked about. Tell him what your mother did." Leo looked at the polished leather shoes of his father. His small hands gripped the armrests of the chair so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He took a shallow, shaky breath. He slowly lifted his head and looked past Richard. He locked eyes with Clara. She stood silently in her uniform, radiating calm, unyielding strength. She gave him a single reassuring nod. Leo did not recite the script. Instead, his entire body surrendered to the weight he had been carrying. He broke down. Hot tears streamed down his cheeks, splashing onto his crisp shirt. "My mom never hurt me," Leo sobbed, his voice echoing in the quiet chamber. "She never did anything wrong. He made me say those things." Richard lunged forward. His face was flushed with explosive rage. "You ungrateful little liar!" Richard roared, raising his hand. Vance grabbed his client by the shoulder, yanking him back before the bailiff could intervene. The judge stood up, pointing a harsh finger at Richard, warning him that one more outburst would result in immediate incarceration for contempt. The judge sat back down and turned his attention back to the weeping child. "Take your time, Leo. Tell me exactly what happened." Leo wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. The dam had broken. Years of hidden abuse poured out into the open room. "It is not safe there," Leo cried. "He screams all the time. He throws things at the walls when he gets mad. Brittany just locks herself in the bathroom and ignores it. He gets so angry if I even mention my mom. He told me that if I did not do exactly what he said, he would send me away to a military boarding school, and I would never see my mom again." Leo took a ragged breath. The intimidation tactics dissolved in the face of his raw honesty. "He forced me to make that phone call," Leo confessed, looking directly at the judge. "On Christmas morning, he woke me up early. He stood right over me. He grabbed my shoulder so hard it left bruises. He dialed the number and forced the phone into my hand. He whispered that if I did not tell her I hated her, he would destroy her career. He stood watching me cry while I said those awful things. I just wanted him to stop hurting me." The judge looked at Richard with absolute disgust. Richard stood completely frozen. The pristine image of the wealthy suburban father had been entirely obliterated. Vance silently packed his legal pad into his briefcase, calculating how quickly he could withdraw as counsel. Leo reached down toward his left shoe. He fumbled with the laces for a moment. He pulled back the tongue of the sneaker and reached inside. He produced a small black flash drive, hidden cleverly beneath the sole. The metallic casing gleamed in the dim light of the chambers. Leo extended his small, trembling hand toward the heavy wooden desk. "My mom told me to keep this safe if Dad ever got scary again," Leo said, his voice suddenly very steady. "She gave it to me a long time ago. She said that it was our absolute secret shield. I think you really do need to plug this right in, Your Honor." The judge stared at the small black object resting on his desk. The tension in the chambers was thick enough to suffocate. He looked from the trembling 13-year-old boy to the flash drive, and then toward the federal officers waiting just beyond the threshold. Richard was sweating profusely, his face flushed with a mixture of terror and unadulterated fury. The judge did not ask for objections. He did not look at Vance Sterling, who was already edging toward the door. The judge reached out and picked up the drive. He turned to his clerk and instructed her to bring the audiovisual cart into the chambers immediately. The clerk scrambled to obey, rolling in a heavy monitor and plugging it directly into the secure judicial network. The judge inserted the drive. A decryption prompt immediately filled the screen. Clara stepped forward and calmly recited a 16-character alphanumeric passcode. She had embedded a secure partition within the drive, ensuring that no civilian forensic team could tamper with the contents before this exact moment. The judge typed the sequence. The green progress bar zipped across the display, and a folder containing a single high-definition video file appeared. The judge clicked the file. The screen flickered to life. It displayed the immaculate interior of Richard's expansive home office. The camera angle was elevated, indicating it was captured from the proprietary smart home security system Richard had paid thousands of dollars to install. He had boasted to his friends about the cutting-edge technology, never realizing that Clara, a military cybersecurity expert, could effortlessly establish a permanent backdoor access protocol. She had quietly monitored and backed up the internal feeds for months, waiting for the precise moment he would hang himself with his own arrogance. On the screen, Richard paced behind his massive mahogany desk. He held a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid. He was speaking to someone just off camera. The timestamp in the bottom corner of the video proved the recording occurred less than 48 hours prior to the emergency custody hearing. Richard took a long sip from his glass and chuckled. It was a cold, narcissistic sound that echoed through the quiet chambers of the judge. The audio quality was pristine, capturing every nuance of his unhinged arrogance. In the physical room, Richard suddenly lunged forward, extending a hand toward the monitor. He screamed an objection, demanding the judge halt the playback immediately. He claimed his privacy rights were being violated by illegal surveillance. The judge did not even blink. He raised a single hand, pointing a finger directly at Richard. The gesture was a silent, absolute threat, promising immediate imprisonment if the man spoke another word. Richard froze, his chest heaving as the video continued to play. The video, Richard smirked at the unseen listener. The audio blasted through the speakers with an absolute clarity. Let that government wage slave try to audit me. I faked the VA loan, I faked the down payment, and the military is too stupid to catch it. Richard bragged, his digital voice dripping with pure, unadulterated contempt. The room listened in stunned silence as he casually detailed his massive federal crimes. They just process the paperwork and hand over the keys to the castle. She thinks she is so smart with her clearance and her uniform. She is absolutely nothing. I control the narrative. I control the boy. By the time I am done with this emergency petition, she will be lucky if they let her keep her pension. The video, Richard took another arrogant sip of his drink, completely unaware that he had just confessed to multiple federal felonies on a high-definition recording. The screen abruptly went black. The silence in the judge's chambers was completely absolute. The air felt heavy, frozen by the sheer magnitude of the confession. Vance Sterling slowly closed his leather briefcase, snapping the brass lock shut. He stepped physically away from Richard, distancing himself from a client who was now a guaranteed federal inmate. Clara remained standing at attention, her expression entirely unreadable. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply watched the inevitable destruction of the man who had tried to steal her son and ruin her life forever. Richard's mind completely snapped. The carefully constructed facade of the successful suburban patriarch disintegrated into pure feral rage. He realized simultaneously that his wealth was gone, his freedom was evaporating, and his ex-wife had orchestrated his absolute ruin. He whipped his head around and locked eyes with Clara. A guttural, animalistic roar tore from his throat. He abandoned all pretense of civility. He lunged across the heavy wooden table, hurtling his body directly toward Clara, his hands extended, reaching violently for her throat. Clara did not flinch. She did not take a single step back. She stood her ground, waiting for the impact. Before Richard could cross the gap, the room exploded into chaotic motion. The two federal marshals stationed at the doorway reacted with instantaneous brutal efficiency. Heavy boots slammed against the hardwood floor. The first marshal hit Richard squarely in the chest, tackling him out of the air. The sheer force of the impact knocked the breath from Richard's lungs. The second marshal grabbed his arm, twisting it sharply behind his back. They drove him face first into the floorboards with a bone-rattling thud. Richard thrashed wildly, kicking and screaming obscenities, but the federal agents pinned him down with overwhelming physical force. The distinct metallic ratcheting sound of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the room signaled the definitive end of his freedom. The judge stood up behind his desk. His face was a mask of cold judicial fury. He looked down at the man writhing on the floor of his chambers. He slammed his wooden gavel down with explosive force. The sound cracked like a gunshot, finalizing the destruction of Richard's empire. Custody revoked, the judge declared, his voice booming with absolute authority. Bailiff, remand him. The heavy mahogany doors of the private chambers swung open with brutal force. Two federal marshals hauled Richard to his feet, dragging his thrashing body into the main courtroom. The gallery erupted in shocked gasps. The polished veneer of the wealthy executive was completely shattered. His designer suit jacket was torn, and his silk tie hung loose around his neck. He screamed for his lawyer, but Vance Sterling was nowhere to be seen. Vance had already quietly slipped out the side exit, preserving his own legal license. The judge followed them, stepping up to his elevated bench without any pity. The doors at the backs of the main courtroom suddenly burst wide open. A swarm of men and women wearing tactical vests bearing the bold yellow letters FBI and DCIS flooded down the center aisle. Their heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor in unison, creating a deafening rhythm of absolute authority. The lead agent, a tall man with a severe expression, flashed his gold badge at the presiding judge. The judge simply nodded, granting them total jurisdiction. The agent turned his attention to Richard, who was still struggling hopelessly against the iron grip of the two strong federal marshals. Richard demanded to know what was happening. He insisted he was a respected businessman and claimed this entire situation was a massive misunderstanding. The lead agent did not entertain his frantic, pathetic excuses. He stepped directly into the personal space of the panicked executive. Richard William Vance. The agent stated, his voice projecting loudly across the silent gallery. You are under arrest by joint order of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. You are officially charged with severe identity theft, aggravated wire fraud, and the systematic defrauding of a major United States federal financial institution. Richard immediately stopped struggling. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, terrified ghost. The agent pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. He secured them tightly around both of Richard's wrists, locking them into place with a sharp metallic click. You have the right to remain silent, the agent recited, pulling a laminated card from his tactical vest. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Richard squeezed his eyes shut. The realization of his absolute total destruction finally registered in his very arrogant criminal mind. He had spent years manipulating the legal system, forging financial documents, and stealing from his own family. He had genuinely believed he was completely untouchable. Now he was facing decades inside a federal penitentiary. From her seat in the second row of the gallery, Brittany watched her husband being read his Miranda rights. She did not cry. She did not rush forward to defend him or offer comfort. Her survival instincts kicked into absolute overdrive. She realized instantly that the massive sinking ship was quickly going down, and she desperately needed a lifeboat before she drowned alongside her criminal husband. She grabbed her expensive designer purse and quietly slid out of the wooden pew. She kept her head down carefully, avoiding the gaze of the federal agents swarming the front of the room. She navigated quickly toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courthouse. She pulled out her smartphone with violently shaking fingers. She rapidly opened her heavily encrypted banking application. She had secretly siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars from Richard's primary accounts over the past entire year, funneling the stolen money into a private offshore trust located securely in the sunny and remote Cayman Islands. She just needed to execute one final massive transfer to secure her escape fund. Her perfectly manicured thumbs flew across the digital keyboard, typing in complex routing numbers and secure authorization codes. She completely ignored the loud shouting occurring behind her. She did not care what happened to Richard or his traumatized son. She only cared about maintaining her luxurious, wealthy lifestyle. She pushed the final digital confirmation button and immediately shoved the glowing phone back into her leather purse. She reached out and pushed the heavy brass handles of the large wooden courthouse exit doors, forcefully pushing them outward. The doors swung open, but her desperate escape was immediately permanently blocked. She bumped directly into the solid chests of two men wearing dark professional suits and holding identical leather briefcases. They did not step aside to let her pass. The stern man on the left reached into his tailored breast pocket and produced a shining silver badge. It caught the bright afternoon light, perfectly illuminating his ultimate authority. He looked down at Brittany with a cold, clinical, highly analytical stare. She took a terrified step backward, realizing her very clever exit strategy had completely failed in a single instant. "Your offshore financial accounts have just been officially completely frozen, ma'am," the federal agent stated flatly, his voice carrying absolutely zero sympathy. "We are special investigators with the United States Internal Revenue Service. We need to have a very long, detailed talk right now about your extensive calculated tax evasion regarding those undeclared luxury influencer gifts." Brittany gasped, dropping her expensive purse onto the hard marble floor. The contents spilled everywhere, but she did not even try to pick them up. Her breathing became shallow and rapid as the agent stepped forward, cornering her entirely against the heavy wooden doors. She looked back toward the courtroom, desperately hoping for a quick distraction. She saw Richard being dragged away by the FBI agents, his head hung in total defeat. She looked at Clara, who was hugging Leo tightly, holding the brave boy close to her heart. They were safe. The nightmare was truly over for them. The IRS agents grabbed Brittany by her arms, mirroring the exact fate of her husband. She had tried to steal a child's future to fund her glamorous fake life. Now she would spend her best years locked inside a concrete cell wearing a prison uniform. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse closed behind Clara and Leo, shutting out the chaotic circus of federal agents and screaming lawyers. The crisp afternoon air hit their faces, carrying the distinct promise of absolute freedom. They walked past a group of curious onlookers who were staring at the spectacle. Clara kept her arm wrapped tightly around the shoulders of her son, guiding him away from the marble building and down the bustling, busy sidewalk toward their waiting car. She did not look back at the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the glass facade. Richard was securely in federal custody, and Brittany was currently being intensely interrogated by relentless investigators from the Internal Revenue Service. The nightmare that had suffocated them for years was finally definitively over. Clara looked down at Leo. His small hands were no longer trembling. The paralyzing terror that had gripped him inside the private chambers had entirely melted away, replaced by a profound, exhausted relief. She promised him a late lunch and asked where he wanted to go. Leo gave her a fragile, genuine smile and requested his favorite classic American diner located just outside the city limits. The diner smelled of roasted coffee, sizzling bacon, and sweet vanilla syrup. Clara and Leo sat in a faded red vinyl booth tucked safely into the quiet back corner of the restaurant, far away from the noisy front entrance. A cheerful waitress wearing a bright pink apron dropped off two massive double cheeseburgers, a towering mountain of crispy golden French fries, and two tall, frosted glasses of thick chocolate milkshake. Clara watched as Leo took a massive bite of his burger, his eyes lighting up with simple joy. For the first time in over a year, she saw the carefree boy he used to be before Richard had forcefully molded him into an anxious, frightened prisoner. They did not talk about the courtroom. They did not discuss the flashing handcuffs, the screaming lawyers, or the federal agents. They talked about his upcoming science project, the new video game he desperately wanted to play, and the upcoming weekend. Clara leaned across the scratched laminate table and wiped a smudge of ketchup from his cheek. She promised him, looking deep into his eyes, that he would never have to step foot inside that massive cold mansion ever again. She assured him with absolute certainty that his father could no longer dictate their lives or use his vast wealth as a weapon of intimidation against them. Leo took a long, slow sip of his chocolate milkshake and nodded happily. The crushing, suffocating weight of the expectations from his father had been permanently lifted from his shoulders. The peaceful atmosphere was abruptly shattered by the sharp ringing of her cell phone resting on the table. The caller screen displayed an unknown number. Clara hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. She swiped the green icon and brought the phone to her ear. A shrill, hysterical voice exploded through the tiny speaker, forcing Clara to hold the device an inch away from her head. It was Brittany. She sounded completely unhinged, her voice cracking with manic desperation and blind panic. Clara demanded to know how Brittany got her personal phone number. Brittany ignored the question entirely, launching into a chaotic, tearful tirade. She screamed that she was currently stranded at a dilapidated gas station 20 miles outside the city limits. The federal agents had confiscated her passport and seized her designer luggage, but allowed her to leave the courthouse pending a formal federal indictment. She had immediately tried to flee the state in her silver sports vehicle. Now she was standing at a dirty gas pump, completely humiliated because the automated machine had declined her platinum credit card. Brittany shrieked into the phone, demanding that Clara fix the disastrous situation immediately. She claimed she had tried 4 different bank cards, and every single one had been aggressively declined by the banking institutions. The gas station attendant was threatening to call the local police because she had already pumped $50 worth of premium fuel that she absolutely could not pay for. "You did this to me," Brittany sobbed, her voice echoing with profound narcissistic outrage. "You told those federal agents about the offshore accounts. You gave them the financial audit. My bank told me my assets are completely frozen. I cannot even buy a bottle of water. You are trying to destroy my entire life out of pure jealousy. You are a vindictive monster, Clara. You are making me completely homeless on purpose just to punish Richard for choosing me over you. You have to transfer money to my account right now so I can leave." Clara sat perfectly still in the red vinyl booth. She listened to the pathetic, desperate wailing of a woman who had willingly participated in the financial and emotional destruction of her family. She looked across the table at Leo, who was happily dipping a French fry into a pool of ketchup, completely undisturbed by the noise. Clara picked up her tall glass. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her chocolate milkshake, savoring the rich, sweet flavor. She swallowed and brought the phone back to her mouth. Her voice was ice cold, radiating absolute, unbothered authority. "I did not make you homeless, Brittany," Clara stated clearly, cutting through the frantic sobbing on the other end of the line. "Federal law did that to you. You deliberately stole money from a military dependent and tried to hide it in the Cayman Islands. That comes with incredibly severe legal consequences." Brittany gasped, sputtering a pathetic denial, but Clara cut her off immediately. "By the way," Clara added, checking the silver watch on her wrist, "asset forfeiture means the federal marshals are changing the locks on the mansion at exactly 5 in the evening. You have exactly 40 minutes to figure out how to get your personal things before you are permanently locked out." Clara ended the call and placed her phone face down on the scratched laminate table. She looked at Leo, who was still happily focused on his double cheeseburger and crispy French fries. He had not heard the frantic screaming on the other end of the line. Clara paid the bill, leaving a generous cash tip for the cheerful waitress. They walked out into the crisp afternoon air and climbed into Clara's modest sedan. She promised Leo they were heading straight home to set up his new video game console. But as she navigated the suburban streets, an undeniable urge pulled at her steering wheel. She needed absolute visual confirmation that the fortress of lies Richard had built was finally crumbling. She took a slight detour, turning onto the wide, immaculate expanse of Elm Street. The neighborhood was typically a silent sanctuary of manicured lawns and towering oak trees. Today it looked like an active crime scene. Clara parked across the street from the massive iron gates, leaving the engine running. She instructed Leo to keep playing his handheld game and stay low in his seat. He nodded, completely engrossed. Clara rolled down her window slightly to watch the spectacular chaos unfolding on the pristine cobblestone driveway. 5 heavily armored federal transport vehicles were parked at harsh angles across the manicured grass. A dozen agents wearing dark windbreakers with thick yellow lettering were marching in and out of the grand mahogany front doors. The asset forfeiture was operating with ruthless military efficiency. 2 burly agents were currently dragging a massive pile of Brittany's prized possessions out of the front entrance. They showed absolutely no respect for the exorbitant price tags. They unceremoniously dumped genuine leather Louis Vuitton trunks and fragile Gucci garment bags directly onto the hard concrete curb. The bags hit the ground with a heavy thud, spilling expensive silk dresses onto the street. The spectacle had drawn a massive crowd. The wealthy, judgmental neighbors who had spent years looking down their noses at Clara were standing at the edge of their driveways. They held their smartphones high, recording every humiliating second. The neighborhood gossip mill was feasting on the absolute destruction of Richard and his glamorous young wife. A battered yellow taxi screeched to a halt right in front of the estate. Brittany tumbled out of the back seat. She looked completely deranged. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her expensive makeup was smeared down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She screamed at the federal agents, demanding they take their filthy hands off her custom luggage. She lunged forward, trying to grab a scattered pile of cashmere sweaters. A female agent immediately stepped in her path, holding up a stern, prohibitive hand. The agent coldly informed Brittany that every single item inside the house was purchased with stolen federal funds and was now the exclusive property of the United States government. Brittany fell to her knees on the pavement, weeping hysterically as she clutched a single silver designer shoe to her chest. Clara watched the pathetic display with complete emotional detachment. She felt zero pity for the woman who had happily tried to leave a boy homeless just hours earlier. The universe was simply returning the exact energy Brittany had put out. A silver minivan suddenly rounded the corner, taking the turn far too fast. The tires squealed aggressively against the asphalt as the vehicle lurched to a halt directly behind the pile of confiscated luggage. Clara instantly recognized the driver. It was Nicole. Richard's older sister had always been his most vicious defender. She shared his blinding arrogance and possessed a lethal, venomous tongue. Nicole slammed the transmission into park and shoved the driver door open. Before stepping out, Nicole caught sight of Clara parked quietly across the street. Her face twisted into a mask of pure demonic hatred. She rolled down her window, pointing a manicured finger directly at Clara. "You vicious, jealous witch!" Nicole screamed, her voice echoing over the quiet hum of the idling engines. "You planned this entire thing. You could not handle the fact that Richard found a younger, prettier wife. You are destroying this family because you are bitter and pathetic. I am going to sue you for everything you own." Clara did not blink. She simply stared back at the screaming woman, allowing the profound silence to highlight Nicole's absolute foolishness. Brittany scrambled to her feet, clutching the silver shoe. She ran toward the minivan, desperate for salvation. "Thank God you are here, Nicole." Brittany sobbed, reaching frantically for the door handle. "Open the door. We have to leave right now before they arrest me too. We can stay at your house until Richard fixes this." Before Nicole could unlock the passenger doors, a heavy hand slammed down on the lock mechanism from the inside. The passenger side door creaked open. Isaiah stepped out onto the street. Nicole's husband was a quiet, remarkably patient man who rarely involved himself in the toxic family drama. Today, his face was the color of ash. His eyes were completely hollow. He stepped directly between Brittany and the sliding door, physically blocking her from entering his vehicle. "Isaiah, what are you doing?" Nicole snapped, turning toward her husband. "Let her in right now." Isaiah ignored his wife completely. He stared at Brittany with raw, unfiltered disgust. "You are not getting in this car," he stated, his voice deathly quiet. "You are not coming to our home." Isaiah turned slowly to face his wife. His hands were shaking violently as he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. He held the document up in the fading afternoon light. His voice cracked, fracturing under the weight of an unbearable, devastating truth. "I just ran a title search on our own home." Isaiah whispered the words, slicing through the chaotic street. "Richard took out a second mortgage on our house, using the same forged notary stamp. Your brother stole our life savings, Nicole." Nicole staggered backward, as if physically struck by the heavy parchment paper trembling in the hands of Isaiah. The vicious mask of absolute superiority melted instantly from her face, replaced by raw, unadulterated horror. She snatched the title search document from her husband, her eyes frantically scanning the black ink. A guttural scream tore from her throat, echoing down the manicured suburban street. Richard had not merely destroyed his own criminal empire, he had systematically dismantled the financial security of every single person foolish enough to trust him. Clara did not stay to watch the spectacular, dramatic neighborhood breakdown unfold. She gently pressed the accelerator, steering her modest sedan away from the chaotic spectacle of Elm Street. She navigated through the quiet suburban avenues, leaving the flashing lights of the federal transport vehicles far behind them. Leo was completely engrossed in his handheld video game, entirely oblivious to the generational wealth disintegrating on the curb behind them. Clara glanced at him through the rearview mirror, feeling a profound sense of fierce maternal protection. The drive back to their small apartment was very peaceful. Clara parked in her designated spot and carefully helped Leo carry his extremely heavy school backpack inside. She promised him a quiet evening of warm pizza and movies. She pulled a fresh box of pepperoni pizza from the freezer. Her cellular phone vibrated violently against the solid granite counter. The caller identification displayed the names Eleanor and Robert Wilson. The parents of Richard had vehemently ignored Clara for 5 agonizing long years. They had treated her like absolute garbage, actively participating in the ruthless campaign to steal Leo. Now they were calling her directly. Clara wiped her hands on a dish towel and took a slow, deep breath. She tapped the green button, answering the active call. Clara did not even have the chance to offer a polite greeting. Eleanor was already weeping hysterically into the receiver. The older woman sounded like a chaotic pitch of pure terror and desperate begging. "Clara, please, you have to make this stop," Eleanor wailed. Robert was shouting in the background, his usual booming, authoritative voice reduced to a frantic, panicked tremor. "They are seizing everything, Clara. They have frozen our retirement accounts. You have to call the federal prosecutors right now and tell them it is all a terrible, tragic misunderstanding. You must stop this ruthless witch hunt right now." Clara leaned against the cool kitchen counter, listening to the frantic unraveling of the Wilson patriarchs. For an entire decade, Eleanor and Robert had enabled the worst impulses of Richard. They had eagerly funded his extravagant lifestyle, covered up his toxic behavior, and actively assisted in his aggressive custody battles. They were not innocent bystanders. They were the architects of his blinding, arrogant pride. "I cannot stop a federal investigation," Clara stated, her voice dangerously calm. "Richard committed massive wire fraud. He brazenly stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from the federal government. He forged signatures to steal properties." Robert snatched the phone from his weeping wife. His heavy breathing rattled through the small speaker. "You are destroying this family over a piece of paper," Robert barked, trying desperately to summon his old, intimidating bluster. "He is still the father of Leo, Clara. You cannot send the father of your only child to federal prison. We simply signed our names as witnesses to help him secure a loan for his business ventures. We did not know the documents were completely forged. You have to call them and say you gave him permission. Be the bigger person, Clara. Save us." The sheer audacity of the demand ignited a cold, blazing fury inside the chest of Clara. "Be the bigger person." She repeated the phrase, letting the bitter irony settle between them. "When you sat in that courtroom and lied under oath about my mental health, were you being the bigger person, Robert? When you actively helped Richard hide his assets during the divorce so I could not afford basic groceries for your grandson, were you being the bigger person? You eagerly signed those fraudulent loan documents because Richard promised you a massive cut of the illegal stolen offshore cash immediately. Eleanor grabbed the phone back, sobbing uncontrollably. We had no choice, Clara. He is our son. We had to protect him. We have always protected him. You are tearing us apart out of pure, bitter spite. If you do not drop these charges immediately, we will lose our entire pension. We will lose our country club membership. We will lose our massive estate. Please, Clara, I am begging you on my hands and knees. Do it for Leo. Do not let your son grow up knowing his mother destroyed his wealthy, loving grandparents. You must drop these charges right now. Clara stared out her kitchen window at the darkening evening sky. The relentless emotional manipulation that had controlled her life for 10 years no longer possessed any power over her. She did not feel an ounce of guilt. I am not destroying your lives, Clara said, her voice ringing with absolute finality. You destroyed yourselves when you decided the law did not apply to the Wilson family. You chose to fund your luxurious lifestyle with stolen federal money. You thought you could crush me and steal my son without facing a single consequence. You were entirely wrong about everything, Eleanor. You did not just sign a piece of paper, Clara continued, her tone dropping to a lethal, icy whisper. You committed perjury on a federal loan document. The Department of Justice does not care about being the bigger person. They only care about felony bank fraud. A sudden heavy pounding echoed loudly through the phone speaker. Clara could hear a booming voice shouting over the frantic, terrified screams of Eleanor. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Open the door immediately. We have a warrant. Clara calmly ended the active call. She placed her cellular phone down on the counter and smiled. The heavy steel doors of the base visitor center swung violently open. Eleanor and Robert stormed into the stark, sterile processing area, demanding immediate civilian access. They had spent the previous 12 hours spinning a desperate, fabricated web of lies to the federal agents standing in their pristine suburban foyer. Robert had played the role of the confused elderly patriarch, perfectly claiming his vision was failing, and he signed the documents without his reading glasses. Eleanor had wept dramatically, insisting they trusted their son blindly, and had zero knowledge of his massive financial crimes. Their calculated performance had kept the silver handcuffs off their wrists for the night, but the delay was only temporary. The federal investigators had seized their passports, frozen their immediate banking assets, and promised a brutal follow-up interrogation. Panic had completely consumed them. Their country club friends were already ignoring their phone calls. The neighborhood association was actively petitioning for their removal. They had one single desperate option left. They needed to force Clara to retract her sworn statements before the grand jury convened. They marched up to the reinforced bulletproof glass of the military security desk. Robert slammed his open palm against the thick, transparent barrier. He demanded that the guard page Clara immediately, using his most authoritative, demanding voice. The young, heavily armed guard stared back at them with absolute stone-cold indifference. He slowly picked up the heavy black receiver and dialed a secure internal extension. Deep inside the secure communications wing, Clara received the sudden notification. She did not feel fear. The relentless anxiety that had governed her entire marriage to their son was completely gone. She walked down the long, brightly lit corridors of the military installation, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound, absolute clarity. Her heavy combat boots struck the polished linoleum floor with a steady, rhythmic cadence of pure authority. She bypassed the main security checkpoint and entered the visitor processing center. The room was divided entirely by thick, shatterproof security glass meant to protect military personnel from external hostile threats. Eleanor immediately pressed her face against the thick barrier the moment Clara walked into the brightly lit room. The older woman looked completely unhinged. Her expensive designer silk scarf was wrinkled and stained with dried tears. Her perfect hair was a wild, tangled mess. Robert snatched the black plastic telephone receiver from the wall, mounting on his side of the glass. Clara picked up the corresponding receiver on her side, pressing the cold plastic to her ear. Clara, you have to listen to reason. Eleanor shrieked, her voice distorted and harsh through the crackling phone line. You are destroying a legacy that took 3 generations to build. We are family, Clara. You cannot do this to your own blood. Clara stood perfectly still, resting her free hand calmly on the metallic counter. She looked directly into the frantic, bloodshot eyes of the woman who had spent an entire decade making her feel entirely worthless. We stopped being family the day you helped your son try to steal my child. Clara stated, her voice carrying absolute, unshakable conviction. You sat in family court and swore under oath that I was an unfit mother. You funded his aggressive legal campaign with stolen federal money. You bought your expensive cars and your luxury vacations with the exact same forged funds. Do not stand there and speak to me about family loyalty, Eleanor. You only care about preserving your stolen wealth. Robert shoved his wife aside, pressing his own red, furious face against the thick, bulletproof glass. The veins in his neck bulged dangerously against his tight collar. You arrogant, ungrateful little brat! Robert snarled, spitting the harsh words directly into the phone receiver. You think wearing that uniform makes you completely untouchable. You think you can hide behind these military gates and destroy our lives without facing severe consequences. I know exactly how this chain of command works, Clara. I have powerful connections in this city. I will personally call your commanding officers right now. I will tell them you are deeply mentally unstable. I will show them your old therapy records. I will inform them that you are maliciously targeting innocent civilians using your federal position to wage a personal vendetta against your ex-husband. We will completely destroy your precious military career. You will be dishonorably discharged and thrown out onto the street with absolutely nothing. Drop these charges right now, or I will make sure you lose your pension, your rank, and your son. He's still Leo's father. You are destroying this family over a piece of paper. Be the bigger person, Clara. Clara remained entirely unmoved by the frantic, desperate display of pure narcissistic rage playing out before her. She had spent a decade shrinking herself to fit into their oppressive mold, always terrified of triggering their immense, endless wrath. Now, looking at the red, sweating face of the man who had mercilessly orchestrated her prolonged emotional torture, she felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical sense of justice. Robert was completely oblivious to the fact that his actions had entirely sealed his own fate. He was still operating under the arrogant delusion that his wealth and social status provided an impenetrable shield against all federal accountability. He truly believed he could bully a military officer out of assisting an active federal investigation simply by threatening to make a few phone calls to his country club associates. He struck the glass again, his heavy gold signet ring, creating a sharp metallic clatter against the thick barrier separating them. He demanded her immediate compliance, raising his loud voice to a truly deafening, aggressive, furious, desperate roar. He ordered her to comply, but Clara doesn't yield an inch. You didn't just sign a piece of paper. You committed perjury on a federal loan document. The DOJ doesn't care about being the bigger person. A loud knocking is heard over the phone line. The FBI is at their door. Clara stood completely frozen outside the heavily fortified military visitor center. The heavy glass doors shut behind her commanding officer, leaving a profound silence. You are banned from all federal property. The words echoed in her mind, carrying the terrifying weight of a tribunal. She had expected retaliation from Richard, but she had never anticipated that his toxic fallout would infect her own chain of command. Her career, her identity outside of being a mother was suddenly hanging by a frayed thread. She tightly gripped the cold steering wheel of her parked sedan, her knuckles turning white against the leather. Before she could process the full magnitude of the threat, her cell phone buzzed violently against the center console. The digital caller identification displayed a generic automated federal corrections phone number. Clara stared at the glowing screen. She knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. She took a slow, deliberate breath and swiped to accept the call. An automated robotic voice informed her she was receiving a collect call from an inmate at the federal holding facility. She pressed the number 1 to accept. The line loudly clicked, and a heavy, incredibly shaky breath filled the tiny speaker. "Clara, it is me," Richard whispered, his voice cracking with a manufactured fragility. "Please do not hang up on me. I used my only phone call to hear your voice." The aggressive, arrogant, cruel tyrant who had mercilessly terrorized her for years was entirely gone. In his place was a pathetic, weeping shell of a man attempting to weaponize her fundamental decency. Clara remained completely silent, letting his desperate sobs echo through the quiet interior of her car. "Clara, I am so incredibly sorry," he desperately pleaded, crying openly into the plastic receiver. "Sitting in this concrete cell, I finally see everything clearly. I have completely lost my way. Do you remember our first apartment on the south side of the city? We had absolutely nothing but an inflatable mattress and a coffee maker. We were so happy back then, Clara. I just wanted to give you the world. I wanted to build an empire so you and Leo would never have to worry about paying a bill. Everything I did was for our family. I lost myself trying to be the provider you both deserved. Please remember the man who married you. I am still that same man deep down. I am begging you to help me. I am terrified." Clara slowly tightened her firm grip on the hot phone. 10 years ago, that trembling tone would have shattered her heart. She would have immediately rushed to his side, ready to sacrifice her own well-being to save him from his disastrous mistakes. Now his manipulative tears only highlighted his cowardice. "You did not do any of this for us, Richard," Clara firmly stated, her voice devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "You did this to feed your own blinding greed." Richard sniffled wetly, trying to maintain the illusion of a broken, penitent father. "I did it for Leo," he cried, his voice escalating into a frantic wail. "I wanted him to go to the best private schools. I just wanted to secure his entire future. You have to believe me, Clara. I only wanted to provide a good life for our son." Clara let out a cold, humorless laugh that cut sharply through the tension of the phone call. "Do not ever use my son to justify your federal crimes, Richard," Clara demanded, her tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "You did not secure his future. You actively destroyed it completely. When the tuition bill for Leo arrived at the academy last autumn, you claimed your business was struggling. You looked me right straight in the eyes and said we needed to buckle our belts. You made me pull money from my own modest savings to keep him enrolled. 2 days later, you drove a brand new imported Porsche directly into the driveway. You spent two full $100,000 on a luxury sports car, while simultaneously lying about your ability to pay for the education of your own child. You bought tailored suits, you bought expensive watches, and you bought a brand new life with a younger woman. You did not spend a single dime on Leo. You spent it all on your massive, fragile ego." Richard stopped his fake crying immediately. The sudden silence on the line proved that his pitiful performance had been a calculated sham. The carefully constructed mask had slipped, revealing the true criminal hiding just beneath the surface. "You are going to regret doing this to me, Clara," he hissed, his voice dropping an octave, returning to its threatening baseline. "You think you have won because you handed a few financial documents to the federal agents. I currently have the best defense attorneys in the entire state. They will tear those charges apart in court. They will expose you as a vindictive ex-wife who manipulated the system. I will beat these charges, and then I am coming for you. I will make sure you never see Leo again." Clara did not flinch at his empty promises. She leaned closer to the microphone of her phone, her expression carved from solid ice. She now possessed a secret weapon that was about to permanently obliterate his arrogant delusions. "You truly have no idea what is happening right now, do you, Richard?" Clara asked, her voice carrying a terrifying certainty. "You are sitting in that holding cell worrying about forged bank loans and angry tax investigators. You think fraud is your biggest problem." Clara paused, letting the silence stretch out and wrap around his neck like a heavy steel chain. "You should not be worrying about the wire fraud," Richard, Clara stated, her voice ringing with devastating finality. "You should be worrying about the espionage charges." The line went dead silent. Richard stopped breathing entirely. What he gasped, the single word fracturing into 1,000 pieces of pure terror. Clara listened to the sharp, frantic intake of oxygen rattling through the tiny phone speaker. The absolute silence stretching between them was the sweetest sound she had ever experienced. The great Richard Wilson, the untouchable real estate magnate, the ruthless manipulator, was currently hyperventilating in a concrete cell. She allowed him to choke on his own rising terror for a full minute, before finally breaking the quiet. "Do you remember the night you threw me out of our home, Richard?" Clara asked, her tone conversational and frighteningly calm. "You dragged me out with nothing but the clothes on my back. You changed the security codes. You laughed while Brittany threw my belongings into the street. But you did not throw everything away, did you?" Richard was silent, only producing a wet, ragged breathing sound. "You kept the heavy storage boxes from my home office." Clara continued, her voice dripping with lethal precision. "You told the judge those boxes contained worthless garbage. You claimed they were abandoned property, but you did not leave them in the basement. You needed quick cash for a weekend trip with Brittany because your accounts were overdrawn from your fraudulent loan schemes. So you took a box of my useless computer junk down to a pawn shop. You sold 3 decommissioned hard drives for exactly $400. I did not know." Richard stammered, his voice vibrating with absolute panic. "It was just old electronic garbage, Clara. It was junk. It meant absolutely nothing. You abandoned it." "It was not garbage, Richard," Clara stated, her words landing like hammer blows. "Those drives belong to the United States military. I am a cyber defense specialist. I write security protocols for federal infrastructure. Those drives contained highly classified encrypted cyber defense training manuals. They detailed the security vulnerabilities of multiple federal databases. They were slated for secure destruction, but you illegally seized them during the eviction. When you walked into that pawn shop and exchanged government property for a handful of dirty cash, you crossed a line that not even your lawyers can erase. You committed unauthorized distribution of highly classified federal materials." "That is impossible!" Richard screamed, his voice cracking. "You are lying! You set me up! I did not know what was on those drives. I am a civilian. I am a real estate developer." "Ignorance is not a valid legal defense for violating the Espionage Act," Clara replied. "The federal government does not care about your real estate portfolio. They do not care about your country club memberships. They care that a civilian stole classified military assets and sold them to an unauthorized third party. The Department of Defense traced the serial numbers on those drives the moment the pawn shop owner plugged them in and triggered the security beacon. They have the video footage of you standing at the counter accepting cash. You handed classified federal secrets to a civilian vendor to buy your mistress a cheap necklace." Clara could hear the distinct sound of the heavy metal door opening in the background of his holding area. She heard heavy footsteps approaching his immediate location. Richard was openly hyperventilating, his breathing rapid and shallow. "Clara, please," he begged, his voice dissolving into a pathetic whine. "They cannot do this to me. I am a wealthy man. I have the best defense attorney in the state. Arthur Sterling will destroy these charges. He will get me out of here by midnight. He is coming here right now. I am going to sue you. I am going to ruin your life." "Actually," Richard, Clara said softly, "I think Arthur Sterling is walking into your holding area now. I highly recommend you put the phone down and listen carefully to what he has to say." Richard dropped the phone receiver, letting it dangle heavily by its metal cord. Clara remained on the line, listening intently to the muffled ambient sounds echoing through the holding facility. She heard the sharp clicking of expensive leather dress shoes approaching the concrete cell. She heard Richard launch into a frantic rant demanding immediate release, threatening to sue the federal government, begging his lawyer to fix the massive problem. Arthur Sterling was an incredibly powerful civilian defense attorney, known for aggressively bullying local prosecutors into submission. He charged an exorbitant hourly rate and possessed a reputation for absolute ruthlessness in state courts. "Richard, please stop talking," Arthur Sterling commanded, his voice echoing clearly through the dangling phone. His tone lacked its usual arrogant bluster. He sounded remarkably strained and deeply uncomfortable. "Get me out of this concrete box." Arthur. Richard demanded, his voice trembling with furious entitlement. My crazy ex-wife planted military hard drives in my office. The FBI is trying to charge me with espionage. It is completely absurd. You need to file an emergency injunction now. I am paying you $500 an hour to fix this mess. Destroy her, Arthur. There was a long pause in the holding area. When Arthur Sterling finally spoke, his voice was completely devoid of emotion. I am not filing an injunction, Richard, the expensive lawyer stated coldly. I am officially dropping you as a client immediately. What? Richard gasped the word, sounding like a physical blow. You cannot do that. I pay your firm thousands of dollars. You work for me. I am a civilian state defense attorney, Richard Arthur replied, his voice echoing with absolute finality. The federal prosecutors just handed me the official indictment folder. You are being charged under the Espionage Act. This is a federal treason case. My legal security clearance does not even allow me to read the actual charges against you. If I attempt to represent you in federal court, I will lose my license to practice law. The Department of Justice is treating you as a legitimate threat to national security. I cannot help you. No civilian lawyer can help you. You are completely on your own. Clara smiled, listening to the absolute silence. Clara ended the active call and placed her phone face down on the passenger seat. She stared through the windshield of her parked sedan, processing the absolute magnitude of her immediate victory. The relentless anxiety that had strangled her for a decade was entirely gone. She turned the ignition key and steered her vehicle away from the imposing military installation, driving straight back to the small apartment where her son was waiting safely. While Clara prepared a quiet dinner, the massive federal machinery was accelerating with terrifying, unstoppable speed. Brittany had spent the last 40 hours aggressively bouncing between luxury hotels, using credit cards that were rapidly declining one by one. She was entirely unaware of the severe espionage charges until a highly armed team of federal agents violently kicked down the heavy wooden door of her temporary suite at the Four Seasons. They did not treat her like a wealthy, privileged socialite. They treated her like an active criminal participant in a massive federal fraud network. They aggressively confiscated her diamond rings, her designer luggage, and her remaining cellular devices. Brittany was dragged into a stark, freezing interrogation room located deep inside the downtown federal building. She sat shivering uncontrollably in her expensive silk dress, staring across a scratched metal table at two seasoned federal prosecutors. They laid out the absolute reality of her bleak situation with brutal, calculated efficiency. Richard was facing decades in federal prison for blatantly violating the Espionage Act. Because Brittany had actively signed fraudulent tax returns and happily spent money stolen from federal grants, she was facing an immediate indictment for tax evasion and accessory to massive financial fraud. They offered her a single fleeting opportunity to save herself. She had to completely turn on her husband and provide absolutely everything she knew. Brittany did not hesitate for a single second. Her instinct for pure selfish survival completely overrode any lingering marital loyalty. She demanded a comprehensive plea deal and immediately began talking. She sang like a terrified canary, eagerly offering up every single secret Richard had ever whispered in their luxurious bedroom. She detailed the hidden offshore accounts, the anonymous shell companies, and the blatantly forged real estate deeds. She offered up his parents and his sister, deliberately exposing their active complicity in hiding his stolen assets. She threw the entire Wilson family directly under the federal bus to save her own skin. By the next morning, the highly classified plea negotiations had spectacularly leaked to the mainstream press. Clara sat at her kitchen island drinking dark black coffee while watching the local news broadcast. The seasoned anchor was reading direct transcripts of the sworn testimony provided by Brittany. The details were incredibly vile, exposing the absolute depths of the ruthless cruelty Richard possessed. Brittany had officially gone on record regarding the aggressive custody battle. She freely confessed to the federal prosecutors that Richard never actually wanted custody of Leo. He despised the young boy because Leo looked exactly like Clara. The news anchor read the most damning excerpt directly from the official court transcript. Richard had laid in bed with Brittany, laughing hysterically about leaving Clara drowning in insurmountable legal debt. He had specifically calculated the exact amount of child support Clara would be legally forced to pay him once he won full custody using his forged financial documents. But the absolute worst revelation was his ultimate sinister plan for Leo. Brittany testified under oath that Richard had already secured a glossy brochure for an extremely strict disciplinary military boarding school located in another remote state. He planned to immediately ship Leo away the exact moment the custody papers were officially signed. He fully intended to collect the monthly child support from Clara and use it to finance his luxurious, exotic vacations with Brittany, while keeping Leo completely isolated and abandoned thousands of miles away. Clara felt her blood run entirely cold. She looked over at Leo, who was happily eating cereal at the kitchen table, completely unaware of the monstrous fate he had narrowly escaped. A fierce protective rage solidified inside her chest. Richard had not merely wanted to win, he had meticulously planned to systematically torture her innocent son for sheer financial profit. Her cellular phone chimed sharply against the granite counter, breaking the heavy silence. The text message was from an unknown prepaid number, but Clara instantly recognized the frantic, dramatic tone. It was Brittany. The message was a pathetic, rambling paragraph of pure, unadulterated desperation. "Clara, please, you have to help me," the message read. "The feds took absolutely everything. My accounts are totally frozen, and my credit cards are completely blocked. Richard ruined my entire life, too. I am currently stuck at a dirty gas station in the freezing rain, and I have nowhere to go. My wealthy friends will not answer my calls anymore. I helped put him away, Clara. I told them absolutely everything. Please just send me $200 for a cheap motel room. I am begging you, woman to woman." Clara stared at the glowing screen. The sheer, breathtaking audacity required to ask her for money was almost unbelievable. Brittany had actively participated in a massive conspiracy to steal her child. She had happily spent stolen money while Clara desperately struggled to buy basic groceries. She had laughed while plotting to send an innocent boy to a harsh disciplinary camp. Now she was playing the victim, demanding female solidarity from the exact woman she had tried to completely destroy. Clara did not type out an emotional, angry response. She calmly opened her secure email application and located the specific file her civilian lawyer had drafted that very morning. She downloaded the document, attached it directly to the text message thread, and hit send. Brittany opened the file, shivering in rain. It was a civil lawsuit for the intentional emotional distress inflicted on Leo. It contained an emergency judicial order, instantly freezing her final hidden checking account. Clara locked away her remaining pennies. Clara watched the read receipt appear on her phone screen. The digital confirmation was the final nail in Brittany's coffin. Clara locked her device and slipped it into her pocket, turning her attention back to her son. Leo was happily finishing his breakfast, completely oblivious to the massive federal machinery actively destroying the people who had tried to ruin his life. The storm had finally passed, and the ultimate reckoning was firmly on the horizon. The relentless anxiety that had strangled Clara for a decade was entirely gone. She finally breathed freely. 8 months later, the heavy oak doors of the downtown federal courthouse swung open. Clara stepped into the cavernous room, wearing her immaculate military dress uniform. Every single ribbon and medal she had painstakingly earned was perfectly aligned, gleaming under the bright, recessed lighting. She took her designated seat in the front row, her posture rigidly straight. The gallery behind her was absolutely packed with journalists, federal agents, and a few of Richard's former business associates who had come specifically to watch the spectacular fall of their ruthless rival. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, buzzing with hushed whispers. The heavy side door opened, and two armed federal marshals escorted the defendant into the room. Clara felt a cold wave of absolute satisfaction wash over her. Richard was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant real estate magnate, who used to mercilessly terrorize her in tailored Italian suits, was entirely gone. In his place was a frail, broken man shuffling forward in a bright orange correctional jumpsuit. His skin was a sickly, translucent pale, devoid of its usual expensive spray tan. His perfectly styled hair had thinned dramatically, revealing a receding hairline he could no longer hide with expensive salon treatments. His shoulders were slumped, his wrists shackled in heavy steel chains that clinked loudly in the silent courtroom. He did not dare look in Clara's direction. He kept his hollow, terrified eyes glued to the polished wooden floor. Judge Margaret Sterling, a notoriously strict federal magistrate with zero tolerance for white-collar criminals, took the elevated bench. She slammed her wooden gavel, bringing the chaotic room to immediate order. She glared down at the defense table with undisguised, absolute contempt. Richard stood trembling between two appointed public defenders. His high-priced legal team had abandoned him months ago when the funds completely dried up. Judge Sterling opened the thick sentencing file and deliberately adjusted her glasses. "Before I issue my final ruling," she announced, her stern voice echoing off the marble walls, "I require the defendant to state his crimes for the official public record." Richard swallowed hard, leaning his shaking body toward the microphone. "I plead guilty to the charges, Your Honor," he mumbled, his voice barely a pathetic whisper. Judge Sterling slammed her hand flat against the solid mahogany bench. "That is entirely insufficient, Mr. Wilson," she barked, her tone lethal. "You orchestrated a massive, calculated campaign of financial fraud. You intentionally weaponized the legal system to abuse your former spouse. You illegally possessed and distributed highly classified federal assets. You will state exactly what you did, and you will look directly at the victim while you say it." Richard slowly turned his heavy head. His sunken, bloodshot eyes finally met Clara's cold, unwavering gaze. The silence in the federal courtroom was absolute. "Tell the court who she is," Judge Sterling demanded. Richard opened his dry mouth, his bottom lip quivering uncontrollably. "Clara is a highly decorated military officer," he rasped, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of his public humiliation. "And who are you?" The judge pressed, her tone entirely merciless. Tears welled in Richard's eyes, spilling over his pale, sunken cheeks. "I am a manipulative fraud." He confessed the words, scraping his throat like broken glass. "I forged financial documents. I lied to state judges. I stole classified defense materials and sold them to a pawn shop because I was drowning in debt. I did it all to destroy her. I am a fraud." Clara did not blink once. She simply stared at the pathetic creature weeping before her, absorbing every single second of his complete destruction. It was the ultimate vindication for years of silent, agonizing suffering. Richard turned back to the judge, dropping his chained hands onto the defense table. He launched into a desperate, pathetic plea for mercy. "Please, Your Honor," he sobbed openly, begging the stoic magistrate. "I lost my company, I lost my home, I lost everything. I made terrible mistakes, but I am a first-time offender. I was just trying to provide for my family. I am begging you for leniency. I will do whatever the court asks. Just please do not lock me away." Judge Sterling did not show a single ounce of pity. She closed the thick file and leaned forward, folding her hands together. "The federal government does not grant leniency to domestic terrorists who disguise themselves as businessmen," she stated, her voice ringing with lethal finality. "You deliberately targeted a military officer. You stole federal secrets. You weaponized the court system to commit identity theft and massive fraud against the United States government. You are not a victim, Mr. Wilson. You are a highly dangerous liability." Richard stopped crying, his breath hitching in his chest. Judge Sterling picked up her wooden gavel. The heavy silence in the courtroom stretched tight. "For defrauding the United States government and identity theft, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison," Judge Sterling declared, her voice carrying the absolute weight of federal law. "I hereby order you remanded into immediate federal custody. You will serve this entire duration consecutively. There will be absolutely no chance for early release. There will be absolutely no parole. The gavel slammed down like a thunderclap, echoing with devastating permanence. Clara simply stood up, straightening her pristine military jacket. She turned around and confidently walked out of the courtroom, leaving the completely shattered ruins of her former tormentor permanently chained behind her forever. Clara opened the front door of her new home. She breathed the fresh paint. She watched Leo sprint across the living room, his laughter bouncing off the ceilings. The house was a sprawling fortress tucked securely inside a gated community. Every window was reinforced. Every door featured biometric locks. She was safe. She was finally safe. She was undeniably safe. The suffocating nightmare of the past decade was permanently erased. The federal court order had executed a total financial reset. The judge commanded the credit bureaus to purge every fraudulent debt Richard had attached to her name. Her credit score was entirely restored overnight. She was no longer a victim hiding in a cramped apartment. She was a victorious survivor standing in the center of her fiercely protected sanctuary. The chime of the gate intercom interrupted the quiet afternoon. Clara tapped the security screen. Isaiah and Nicole stood on the pavement. Clara granted them access and waited by the open door. They walked up the driveway, moving with a completely defeated posture. Nicole looked shockingly frail. The haughty matriarch who constantly criticized Clara's military career was gone. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a modest cardigan. Clara stepped aside, allowing them into the bright foyer. The silence between them was loaded with undeniable regret. Richard had ruthlessly cannibalized his own family to sustain his fraudulent empire. He had secretly leveraged his parents' enormous estate, using forged signatures to secure massive illegal loans. When the federal indictments dropped, the banks instantly seized the magnificent family mansion. Nicole had lost her home. She had lost her social standing. She had lost her curated reality. They were only saved from total bankruptcy because Isaiah quietly maintained separate accounting ledgers, strictly isolating his retirement funds from his son's toxic reach. Nicole stood in the foyer, trembling visibly. She looked around the pristine home and then looked directly into Clara's eyes. Tears spilled over her wrinkled cheeks. "I am so sorry, Clara," Nicole whispered, her voice fracturing with genuine raw agony. "I am so incredibly sorry. I am so completely sorry." Clara did not move. She let the repetition of the apology hang in the air. "I was utterly blind," Nicole sobbed, clutching her handbag. "I chose him because he was my golden boy. I chose to believe his lies because admitting the truth about my son was too agonizing. I watched him tear you apart, and I actively helped him. I defended a monster, Clara. He stole our home. He stole our security. He almost stole Leo. I was so wrong. I was so incredibly wrong about you. You are the strongest woman I know. I do not expect your forgiveness, but I needed to look you in the eye and admit my absolute failure." Isaiah placed a gentle hand on his wife's trembling shoulder. He looked at Clara with deep respect. "We failed you, Clara," he stated firmly. "We failed you, and we failed our grandson. We will spend the rest of our lives regretting that colossal failure." Clara looked at the broken elderly couple. The fiery, burning rage that had consumed her for years had burned itself out, leaving behind a cool, hardened steel. She did not feel the need to exact further vengeance. The universe had already delivered a spectacular, merciless justice. "I forgive you, Nicole," Clara said, her voice calm and remarkably steady. "I forgive you for being blind. I forgive you for siding with him. I forgive you." Nicole let out a gasp of relief. She took a hopeful step forward, her arms slightly raised, but Clara raised a single firm hand to stop the older woman in her tracks. "I forgive you, but I will never forget. You are welcome to visit Leo. You are welcome to be his grandparents. But you will do so entirely on my terms. You will follow my rules. You will respect my boundaries. If you attempt to manipulate this child or undermine my authority, you will never step foot on this property again. Do we have a crystal clear understanding?" Nicole nodded frantically, swiping the tears from her face. "Yes, Clara, She agreed instantly, her voice thick with gratitude. Yes, we understand completely. Thank you. Thank you for showing us mercy we absolutely do not deserve. After Isaiah and Nicole departed, Clara walked back into the living room. Leo was happily assembling a complex puzzle on the Persian rug. He looked up at her, offering a brilliant, carefree smile that made her heart swell with fierce, protective pride. They had survived the absolute worst. They had walked through an inferno of deception and emerged victorious. Clara walked toward the kitchen to pour a glass of iced water. Before she could reach the granite counter, a specific, distinct electronic tone echoed through the quiet house. Clara froze. It was not her standard civilian ringtone. It was the heavily encrypted secure line issued for high-level military communications. She walked over to the kitchen island and stared at the glowing black device. The caller identification displayed a deeply restricted Pentagon routing number. Federal prosecutors had finalized their review of her actions during the espionage crisis. Her flawless handling of the stolen classified drives had evidently triggered major shockwaves through the highest echelons of the Department of Defense. Clara picked up the heavy device and swiped to accept the secure connection. Major Wilson speaking, Clara answered, her voice snapping into sharp military precision. Major, this is General Thomas Vance calling directly from the Pentagon, the deep, commanding voice stated smoothly. The Joint Chiefs have thoroughly reviewed your exceptional conduct regarding the recent civilian breach of classified defense protocols. Your tactical brilliance and unwavering integrity under extreme personal duress were nothing short of extraordinary. We do not want you writing training manuals anymore, Major. We are offering you a highly coveted command position within the newly formed Advanced Cyber Warfare Division. We need your strategic mind on the front lines. Are you ready to deploy? I accept the command, General Vance. Clara answered, her voice ringing with absolute certainty and a profound sense of purpose. I am ready to deploy. The connection terminated with a sharp click, leaving Clara in the quiet expanse of her secure kitchen. She placed the encrypted device back onto the granite island. A profound sense of alignment washed over her. For a decade, she had allowed Richard to aggressively shrink her world, to confine her brilliance within the suffocating walls of his manufactured reality. She had hidden her tactical expertise behind the mundane facade of a compliant corporate spouse. She had minimized her military achievements to protect his fragile civilian ego. That era was permanently dead. She was no longer a suppressed asset. She was a fully activated weapon, and the United States government had just handed her the reins to a specialized cyber warfare division. 6 weeks later, the brilliant morning sun illuminated the pristine parade ground of the secure military installation. The sky was an unbroken expanse of crystalline blue, reflecting the absolute clarity of the day. Clara stood at rigid attention on the elevated wooden dais. She wore her formal military dress uniform. The dark, immaculate fabric was perfectly pressed, the sharp creases aligning with mathematical precision. Rows of brightly colored service ribbons and heavy metallic medals decorated her left chest, a silent, glittering testament to years of unseen sacrifice and exceptional tactical service. The heavy brass buttons of her jacket gleamed in the intense sunlight. She breathed in the crisp morning air, feeling the solid weight of her polished dress shoes against the wooden platform. The audience seated in the folding chairs below the dais represented the true, authentic family Clara had meticulously built from the ashes of her previous life. There were no fake socialites and no manipulative corporate sharks. The front row was occupied by her loyal military colleagues, men and women who had stood shoulder to shoulder with her during high-stakes federal operations. They wore their uniforms with the same quiet pride, radiating genuine respect. Isaiah sat proudly among them, wearing a sharp, tailored suit. He sat alone, respecting the strict boundaries Clara had established regarding Nicole. He nodded respectfully toward Clara, his eyes shining with unspeakable pride. He had chosen to honor his daughter-in-law and his grandson, proving that genuine loyalty was forged through actions, not mere biological ties. General Thomas Vance stood at the wooden podium positioned at the center of the dais. He adjusted the microphone and looked out across the gathered crowd. He held the official promotion warrant in his large, weathered hands. The installation fell into a deep, respectful silence. Attention to orders. General Vance commanded, his deep voice echoing across the open parade ground, bouncing off the distant brick barracks. The President of the United States has reposed special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, fidelity, and abilities of Major Clara Wilson. In view of these qualities, and her demonstrated potential for increased responsibility, she is hereby promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Armed Forces. Clara maintained her rigid posture, staring straight ahead. The words washed over her, carrying the magnificent weight of ultimate vindication. She had survived a deliberate, calculated campaign of domestic terrorism, orchestrated by her former husband. She had protected her child, dismantled a massive federal fraud network, and secured a highly classified command position. She had won the war. General Vance stepped back from the podium and turned toward Clara. "Will the family please come forward to pin on the new rank?" he instructed, his stern face breaking into a warm, genuine smile. Leo stepped out from the front row. He was wearing a crisp dark navy suit and a neatly tied blue necktie. He looked older, taller, and entirely unburdened by the terrifying shadows that had once haunted their previous home. His bright eyes danced with absolute joy as he walked confidently up the short wooden stairs to the elevated dais. He carried the two small velvet boxes containing the silver oak leaves. He walked directly up to his mother. Clara looked down at her son, breaking her military bearing just enough to offer him a radiant, loving smile. Leo carefully removed the previous golden oak leaves from the epaulettes of her dark uniform jacket. He replaced them with the heavy silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel, pressing the sharp pins firmly through the thick fabric and securing the brass backings. His small hands were steady and precise. He patted the silver insignia, making sure it was perfectly straight. He looked up at Clara, his face beaming with fierce pride. "Congratulations, Colonel Mom," Leo whispered softly, his voice carrying over the quiet dais. "Thank you, my brave boy," Clara whispered back, her heart expanding with an overwhelming wave of pure, unconditional love. The audience erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. Her military peers stood to their feet, cheering loudly for their newly promoted commander. Isaiah wiped a single tear from his cheek, clapping his hands together with profound joy. Clara turned to face the cheering crowd. She did not feel the crushing anxiety that had plagued her past. She did not feel the need to shrink or apologize for her brilliance. She stood tall, owning every single ounce of her hard-earned success. She was a mother, a warrior, and a commander. Later that evening, the brilliant colors of the sunset faded into a deep, velvety twilight. Clara sat comfortably on the spacious back porch of her secure, gated home. The air was cool and refreshing, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine from her newly planted garden. She held a warm ceramic mug of chamomile tea, letting the soothing steam rise against her face. Inside the house, Leo was happily playing a video game with a friend from his new school, his carefree laughter drifting through the open sliding glass door. Clara rested her bare feet on the padded outdoor ottoman and picked up her secure tablet. She casually scrolled through the evening digital news feeds, enjoying the peaceful silence of her sanctuary. She swiped past the international headlines and the local political updates. Her eyes caught a specific headline in the regional real estate section. She tapped the article, reading the text with a profound sense of ultimate poetic justice. The sprawling, luxurious mega mansion formerly owned by disgraced and currently incarcerated real estate developer Richard Wilson had finally been auctioned off by the federal government. The property had been seized by the Department of Justice to pay back the millions of dollars Richard had systematically stolen from federal grant programs and private investors. The article detailed the dramatic fall of the Wilson empire, noting that the extravagant estate had sold for significantly less than its original appraised value. But the absolute sweetest revelation was the identity of the new buyer. The massive estate had been purchased at the federal auction by a highly respected national charity organization. The charity specialized in providing comprehensive housing, medical care, and psychological support for homeless military veterans. The extravagant ballroom, where Richard had once hosted his fake, pretentious corporate galas, was currently being converted into a communal dining hall for displaced soldiers. The luxurious master suite where he had plotted his sinister schemes with Brittany was being retrofitted into a state-of-the-art physical therapy center for wounded warriors. Richard Wilson had spent his entire pathetic life obsessing over status, wealth, and punishing anyone who dared to challenge his authority. He had specifically targeted a military officer attempting to destroy her career and steal her child. Now he was rotting in a federal prison cell for the next 15 years, with absolutely zero chance of parole. His ill-gotten wealth had been completely liquidated, and his ultimate symbol of arrogance, his precious untouchable mansion, had been permanently transformed into a sanctuary for the exact same military community he had arrogantly tried to defraud. Clara took a slow, deep sip of her warm tea. The irony was exquisite. The justice was absolute. She locked the screen of her tablet and set it down on the glass patio table. She leaned back against the plush cushions of her outdoor chair, closing her eyes and listening to the gentle rustling of the wind through the tall oak trees. The toxic, suffocating past was permanently reduced to ashes, scattered and blown away by the winds of truth. She had successfully navigated the darkest storm of her life and emerged completely unbroken. Clara smiled, breathing in the crisp night air, entirely ready for whatever the dawn would bring. Share your own experiences about setting boundaries and creating your own safe space in the comments below.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.